being socially awkward, having trouble communicating and getting along with people. That's a huge hurdle to overcome in your life, because the harder it is for you to get along with other people, the more you'll isolate yourself and the more angry you'll get, and that will create an unhealthy imbalance. Everyone has different gifts. Everyone's brain works differently. Not everyone has the gift to communicate greatly, but everyone, to a certain degree, has the ability to work on their character. So in life, we're all dealt a hand. Some people have a worse hand than others, but don't try to compare your hand to others, because we can all tell about bad things that happen to us, and everyone has something worse than you, no matter who you are. So in life, get away from trying to figure out life. Try to figure out yourself. Try to just get the best life you can in this earth. Don't let your mind be controlled by people who want to give you philosophy about the life after this life. Because I believe that if you don't work on yourself in this life, even if you have the grace, which I believe we all do, for this afterlife, what have you done with your life? And have you caused yourself and others more suffering? See, if you're socially awkward and you struggle communicating and you dwell on the bad things that happen to you, you're going to suffer more than you need to, and you're going to make other people suffer. I read an article about a guy recently who committed a mass shooting at a Walmart, and I believe it was in Virginia in America. And he was a worker. He worked for 10 years. So he was willing to work. I think that's a positive. I think your mental health and certainly your financial health deteriorates when you don't work. And I think if you believe in anything good, you want to do something productive, because society would be worse if there were no nurses, if there were no auto mechanics, if there were no internet. A lot of pushback I get in life, well, life's just not about materialism. Well, don't forget, the internet is built by people who work, okay? It doesn't just magically appear. There's thousands of fiber optic cable, thousands of buildings, thousands of computer servers, thousands of people who work on software, on hardware, on electricity, on cooling, all to bring you the internet so you can say materialism doesn't matter and it makes your life better. Thank God for people who work. So this guy had that right. At least he was working. I think that's positive. So how did it go negative? Well, he wrote a note. And don't try to figure out the bad people. Don't try to figure out life, because the people who take this road and commit mass shootings and things are still less than 1% of society. So don't over-exaggerate the worst of society. But it's always interesting to look at, because we're all connected in some level of humanity. And in this note, he asked God to forgive him. And again, it's like, only God's going to give the final judgment, but no one has a right to kill anyone. I don't care. But he asked God to forgive them. He said he wished his parents would have noticed the deficits in his communication skills and worked on that more. Now, that may or may not be a fair thing, because at a certain point you can't blame your parents, and I think his parents were also drug addicts, and I think he was molested as a child. But still no excuse, but this is all interesting. And that's why I do believe in the future, if we really care about life, you should have to take out a permit to have a child. You should go through a psychological exam, a financial exam, a health exam. You got to do that if you're going to foster a child to some degree. You got to do that if you're going to put on an addition on your house. You got to take out a permit. I mean, so, we may have to get there, but let's continue to talk about this. But also what I noticed from this article was this shooter worked for 10 years as a nighttime manager. I think one is you work the night shift if you're socially awkward, or if you don't like to deal with people. I worked a night shift. I think it has a benefit where you deal with less people, and that's good. And so I empathize. And I think there's a great, if you're not good with people, work the night shift. But here's the negative. He was a leader on the night. And that's okay, but from what I read, he didn't treat his coworkers properly, wellly. And that's what I always tell you. When in doubt, take the promotion, because if you don't take the promotion, someone worse than you may. And then they'll abuse you. Okay? And that's why I tell you, be careful in life. If you don't want the responsibility, you're basically giving that responsibility to someone else. And if you just assume they're going to treat you better than you can treat yourself, if you're going to assume that they'll accept responsibility and be a good leader better than you, you make a bad move. Okay? Assumption is the mother of all disasters. Never assume. Take the promotion. So I'm sharing all these things with you because they touch my soul, and I want to share them in a healthy, positive, helpful way. Not to shame, not to hurt, not to judge. This is the way I got to get this out. So I say all this, parents, teacher, children, to communicate. I think about one of my great viewers, Justin. I met him in Florida. He's a great guy, great member. Thank you, Justin. And I remember we had a conversation. I met him one time in a park, and he was telling me about his son. And one part of the conversation that stood out, he said, Sam, I'm teaching my son because he's shy. I was shy growing up when I was very young. I was younger. His child's young. And he goes, I was teaching my child, like, even if you want to be by yourself, there's still a value in learning how to communicate with others. I said, Justin, God bless you, brother. He's right. And that stood out in my mind. That's true. Even if you're going to work remote, even if you're going to work the night shift, even if whatever you're going to do, there's value in putting effort. Lazy people suffer, and lazy people make other people suffer. There's wisdom in putting effort. There's love in putting effort, in learning how to communicate to avoid a disaster instead of creating one. We can't figure out all the bad things that happen to this child's life. We can say, look, if you're on drugs, you should get an abortion, not have a child. Because not only are you giving that child your DNA, you're probably going to put that child in an atmosphere of unhealthy behavior, such as abuse, etc., etc. And again, that's why I go back to I'm pro-abortion when it's needed. I think you just have to take out a permit to have a child. If we believe in less suffering, we care about this. I believe God could still work a miracle out of anything. I believe in that scripture that they're not just cursed because of the parents, but also believe in, guys, you pass a level of your DNA onto your children. They come from you. So if you're out there really struggling, you got to think about that. Okay. And there's no exact science to life. There's no absolute truth. And the people who commit mass human catastrophes are less than 1% of society. But if those people who do that get in power, whether the night shift manager at Walmart, whether the president, or whether a dictator, when those people get in power, remember the masses are followers, and even if they're wrong, they'll follow them. Okay, but sometimes it's good to follow people because that's how you learn and you grow. That's why there's no exact science, right? I can say that, people are just followers, but sometimes when you're following someone of good, no one's perfect, but when there's good principles to be led to, you should follow. And what I'm teaching here is all wholesome. I'm not telling you to hurt yourself or hurt others. What I'm telling you to do, work on the ability to communicate, deal with your personal issues. And there's no excuse for going to that next level, but there's mental illness. But there's also mental awareness, because I think about this guy who's mentally ill. He was mentally aware to know he was wrong because he wrote a note and asked God to forgive him. If he knew he was right, he would never wrote that note. I think about the mass shooter years ago in Parkland, Florida. In a school, he killed innocent children. And he didn't get the death penalty. Why? Because one lady on the juror said she can't agree with the death penalty because he's mentally ill because of his parents. His parents were alcoholics. Does that excuse you going to kill innocent people? Well, even if you give him the death penalty, that's not really a thing. But I found that very interesting. God, you think you're going to retrain his brain? It's crazy. But he had adopted parents. The Parkland shooter, he had adopted parents that tried to help him. See, in life, you can't just focus on, my mother was an alcoholic. Yeah, but what about your adopted parents that helped you? That loved you, that brought you up in Parkland? That's a high-end community. Sometimes I watched the Mike Tyson interview. He talked about, his bad childhood. And someone was checking him. He goes, yeah, Mike, you had a bad childhood, but you also had a blessing. You also had someone take you out of a bad situation into their home to love you. Not everyone has that. See, as bad as you have it, whether you're Mike Tyson or the Parkland shooter, you have good stuff in your life. Acknowledge the good. Acknowledge the good. Acknowledge the good. And work on yourself. And this is what I wanted to share. I mean, I tried to structure it as best I could because I do recognize I have the gift of communication, but I also recognize I got to put effort and also recognize I got to work on myself because I don't want to give you just a bunch of hot air. And if someone's really bad for your mental health, separate from them. We live in a first world country with social services. Remember, when Jesus was alive, there was no social services. There was no mental health care. So a lot of times I hear people now say, oh, this person's not compassionate. Well, we live in a first world country. We pay taxes, so we have social services, mental health, so there's not destitute. We do that because we care. Okay, we're a more empathetic society than ever, especially more than the biblical times. Okay. And you need to acknowledge that, Society, humanity is more empathetic, more loving, more opportunity, more everything than ever. And if you can acknowledge that while you're watching the internet brought to you by people who work around the clock to bring you the internet, you're delusional. Or you're watching too many things that are too negative and taking hold of your mental health. Hope this video helped, okay? If it did, click the thumbs up, share the video, and thank you to everyone who watches.